Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are jumping right in to an incredible piece of biological architecture, the human small intestine.
We are, and we're going straight to the source material, Chapter 64 from Gray's Anatomy.
Our mission is to really break down the anatomy here, the structure, the relationships, all of it, into something you can actually picture.
And that's the real challenge, isn't it? Because you're looking at, about 5 meters of tube that runs from the stomach's pylorus all the way to the ileocecal junction.
It seems like just a jumbled mass.
It does, but it's not. It's actually a highly organized system. And the key, I think, is to understand it's split into two completely different worlds.
Right, you've got the fixed part and then the mobile part.
Exactly. You have the duodenum, which is mostly locked in place, and then the jejunum and ileum, which are free to move around. Visualizing that difference is everything.
Okay, so let's start with that fixed part, the duodenum. It's the shortest and widest section, only about, 25 centimeters?
That's it. But its location is so predictable. The best way to picture it is to imagine a capital C drawn on the back wall of your abdomen, sort of between the L1 and L3 vertebrae.
And nestled right inside that C shape.
He is the head of the pancreas. It fits in there perfectly. And when we say locked in place, we're really talking about it being retroperitoneal.
So sitting behind the peritoneum, that membrane lining the abdomen?
Precisely. That's what makes it so much less mobile than the rest of the gut.
All right, let's trace that C. It starts with the superior, our first part. This is the segment that always seems to come up with clinical problems, like ulcers.
Oh, absolutely. It's a notorious little 5-centimeter segment.
And why is that? What makes it so vulnerable?
It's all about its neighbors. It's about who it's sitting next to. Only the very first bit, what we call the duodenal bulb, is actually mobile and covered in peritoneum.
Ah, okay.
The rest of it is fixed, and it lies directly in front of some really critical structures: the gastroduodenal artery, the bile duct, and the hepatic portal vein.
And there it is. That's the architectural flaw that can lead to disaster.
It is. So if you get a peptic ulcer on the posterior wall of that first part of the duodenum, it can just burn right through.
And hit that gastroduodenal artery.
And you get a massive, life-threatening hemorrhage. It's a true surgical emergency.
But if the ulcer's on the other side, on the anterior wall?
Totally different story. Then it just punches into the peritoneal cavity.
Right.
That causes peritonitis, which is serious, of course, but it's a completely different kind of crisis than a massive arterial bleed.
A few millimeters makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving down the C, get to the descending, or second part. This is almost totally retroperitoneal. What's hiding behind it?
Well, this part runs down, sort of convex to the right. And behind it, you've got the hilum of the right kidney, the right renal vessels, the inferior vena cava.
So major structures.
Major structures. But the real action on the second part is on its medial wall, its inside curve.
Because that's the entry point.
That's the grand central station for digestive fluids. We're talking about the major duodenal papilla.
Right, about 8 to 10 centimeters from the pylorus.
Yep. And this is where the bile duct and the main pancreatic duct usually join up and empty into the duodenum. You might also find a minor papilla a little higher up for the accessory pancreatic duct.
Okay, so the duodenum then makes a sharp left turn into the horizontal, or third part. This section has to cross some pretty major vessels.
It does. It runs from right to left. And to do that, it has to pass directly in front of the two biggest vessels in the abdomen: the inferior vena cava and the abdominal aorta.
And this is where things can get tight. This is where superior mesenteric artery syndrome comes into play.
This is exactly it. You've got the duodenum literally caught in a vascular vice.
So sandwich.
Perfectly sandwiched. It's got the superior mesenteric artery, the SMA, in front of it, and the aorta behind it. Now, usually there's a nice cushion of fat there.
But someone loses a lot of weight very quickly.
That fat pad disappears. The angle between the SMA and the aorta narrows, and it can literally just crush the duodenum shut, causing a complete obstruction.
Wow. And that brings us to the final piece of the C, the ascending or fourth part. It's the shortest bit, and it ends very abruptly.
It does, at the duodenojejunal flexure. And this junction is held up by a really famous anatomical landmark.
The ligament of Treitz.
The ligament of Treitz. For any surgeon, this is like a bright red "you are here" marker on the map.
It tells them where the fixed duodenum ends and the mobile intestine begins.
Exactly. Radiologists use it to make sure the gut is rotated correctly. Surgeons use it as the starting point for measuring the bowel for resections. It's fundamental.
You know, speaking of surgeons, I've heard about the Kocher maneuver. How does that technique leverage the duodenum's fixed position?
Ah, that's a great question. It's a classic surgical move because that second part of the duodenum is retroperitoneal. Its lateral side is tacked down.
Right.
So in the Kocher maneuver, a surgeon carefully cuts those attachments. Once it's freed up, you can gently lift and flip the duodenum and the head of the pancreas medially.
And that exposes everything that was hiding behind it.
It exposes the deep part of the bile duct, the vena cava, the right renal vessels. It's an elegant way to get access to that deep, crowded space.
So the fixed architecture is clear. Now what about its blood supply? The text says duodenal ischemia is pretty rare. Why is it so well protected?
It has a fantastic redundant supply. It's a system of what we call arcades. The main players are the superior and inferior pancreatico-duodenal arteries.
Okay.
So that gastroduodenal artery we mentioned earlier, the one in danger from ulcers, it gives off the superior vessels, and those vessels form these rich connections, these anastomoses, with the inferior vessels which come off the SMA.
So it's getting blood from two different directions. It's like a traffic circle with multiple on-ramps.
That's a perfect analogy. If one route gets blocked, the other can usually compensate. The venous drainage just follows the arteries back, with the superior vein draining to the portal vein and the inferior to the superior mesenteric vein.
And let's connect this to the patient experience. Pain. If you have, say, a duodenal ulcer, where do you feel that pain?
Well, because the duodenum develops from the embryonic foregut, just like the stomach, the pain signals travel back along the sympathetic nerves to the coeliac ganglia,
And that gets referred where?
to the epigastric region, that high central part of the upper abdomen. It's a classic, though often vague, pain pattern that points to a foregut problem.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay.
So we've covered the fixed, foregut-derived duodenum. But the second we cross that ligament of Treitz, the whole world changes.
The world changes completely. Now you're in the next 5 meters of mobile architecture, the jejunum and the ileum.
And they are mobile because they're suspended by the mesentery.
That's right. The mesentery is this beautiful fan-like sheet of peritoneum that tethers the small bowel to the posterior abdominal wall, but gives it the freedom to move, to contract, to shift around.
Now, there isn't a sharp dividing line between the two, but what are the quick telltale signs that you're looking at jejunum versus ileum?
Well, you can often tell just by looking and feeling. The jejunum, which is the first 2/5, has a much thicker wall. It feels more robust, looks a deeper red because it's more vascular, and its diameter is wider, maybe 4 centimeters.
And the ileum.
The ileum, the distal 3/5, is thinner walled, paler, and narrower, closer to 3 centimeters. It just feels less substantial.
And if a patient is lying on their back, where do you typically find these loops?
The jejunal loops tend to hang out in the upper left part of the abdomen. The ileal loops are usually found more in the lower right quadrant, often dipping down into the pelvis.
Okay, so that's the outside. What about the inside? The internal folds, the plicae circulares, are a dead giveaway.
Oh, a huge giveaway. In the proximal jejunum, these folds are just massive. They're deep, numerous, they even branch. On a contrast study, they give it this classic feathery appearance.
All for maximizing surface area for absorption.
Exactly. But as you travel down into the ileum, those folds get smaller, flatter, and much more sparse. By the time you reach the very end of the ileum, the inner wall can look almost smooth.
So as the absorptive surface area decreases, the immune function seems to ramp up, especially in the ileum.
That's a really sharp observation, yes. The ileum is famous for its concentration of lymphoid tissue. We're talking about the aggregated lymphoid nodules, or Peyer's patches.
The immune surveillance system.
That's what it is. These are large clusters of immune cells. Sometimes you can even feel them, and they are packed into the last foot or so of the ileum, sampling everything that's about to enter the large intestine.
And speaking of the terminal ileum, we have to talk about Meckel's diverticulum.
We do. It's the most common congenital anomaly of the GI tract. It's a little pouch, a remnant of the embryonic duct connecting the gut to the yolk sac.
And the reason it's so clinically important is because when it gets inflamed, it perfectly mimics another condition.
It perfectly mimics acute appendicitis. The pain is in the exact same spot.
So why is that? Why do appendix pain and Meckel's pain feel identical?
It comes back to embryonic origins. Both the appendix and the terminal ileum are derived from the midgut. So their visceral pain signals travel back along the nerves of the SMA plexus.
And that pain is referred to the periumbilical region.
Right around the belly button. So early on, both conditions present with that central abdominal ache. It's a classic midgut pain pattern.
That is such a key clinical pearl. Now let's trace the blood supply for all this mobile gut. The main highway is the superior mesenteric artery, the SMA.
The SMA, it comes off the aorta right around the L1 level, but the real genius is in its branching pattern. It's completely different for the jejunum and the ileum.
And this is the surgeon's cheat sheet, right?
It absolutely is. When the SMA sends branches to the jejunum, they form very few vascular loops or arcades, maybe just 1 to 3 tiers.
And that results in?
Very long, straight arteries, we call them the vasa recta, that run directly to the gut wall. They look like the teeth of a comb.
And the ileum is the opposite.
The complete opposite. The arteries supplying the ileum form this complex, intricate network of many, many arcades, maybe up to 6 tiers of loops.
Which means the final straight arteries are much shorter.
Much shorter and narrower. And this is really important surgically. Even though those arcades provide great collateral flow, if you divide several of those short vasa recta to the ileum in a row, you can still cause a patch of ischemia.
That's fascinating. So let's zoom in even further to the microscopic level. The small intestine is the undisputed champion of absorption, and it's all about surface area.
It's an engineering marvel. It's all about geometric magnification. You start with the circular folds we talked about. They increase the area by about a factor of 2.
Okay.
Then you have the villi, these tiny finger-like projections covering the folds. They boost the area by a factor of 7.
And then it goes one level deeper.
One level deeper. Every single absorptive cell on those villi is covered in microvilli, the brush border. And that increases the surface area by another factor of 13.
You multiply all that out and you get
A total surface area of almost 30 square meters. It's astounding. Like a huge living room carpet crammed inside a 5-meter tube.
just incredible. And inside each of those villi, there's a special vessel for absorbing fats, isn't there?
There is. It's called the lacteal. It's a large, dead-end lymphatic vessel. Fats get packaged into these particles called chylomicrons, which are too big for blood capillaries.
So they take the lymphatic route instead.
They get absorbed into the lacteals and travel through the lymphatic system before they eventually get dumped into the bloodstream.
Now, what about the cellular workforce? Deep in the intestinal glands, the crypts of Lieberkühn, who are the key players.
Well, you have the stem cells, which are amazing. They're constantly regenerating the entire lining of the intestine every 4 or 5 days, but my favorites are deeper down.
The Paneth cells.
The Paneth cells. These guys are the gut security guards. They sit at the bottom of the crypts and secrete these powerful antimicrobial proteins like defensins and lysozyme.
So they're basically creating a sterile zone to protect the stem cells and control the gut bacteria.
That's exactly what they're doing. They're crucial for maintaining that delicate balance with our microbiota.
Finally, let's talk about movement. How does the small intestine keep everything flowing in an organized way?
It has its own intrinsic rhythm. When you're fasting, it's dominated by something called the Migrating Motor Complex, or MMC.
The housekeeper wave.
That's the one. It's this powerful, sweeping contraction that cleans out any residual debris. And this rhythm is generated by special pacemaker cells called the interstitial cells of Cajal, or ICC.
And the rhythm isn't the same all the way through, is it?
No, it's faster at the start, about 11 contractions per minute in the jejunum, and it slows down to maybe 7 or 8 per minute in the ileum. And what's really amazing is that this is all run by the gut's own nervous system. It even works in a transplanted intestine.
So we've charted this whole journey. From the fixed, C-shaped duodenum with its critical relationships, to the mobile, highly specialized jejunum and ileum with their contrasting folds and vascular patterns.
And if you just think about one final functional point, remember how the ileum has fewer folds?
Yeah.
Despite that, it's actually better at absorbing water and electrolytes than the jejunum. It can pull sodium back across a much steeper gradient.
And that has huge clinical implications.
Huge. It's why if a patient needs an ostomy, a surgical opening, a jejunostomy high up in the gut leads to massive fluid and electrolyte loss. The output is watery and high volume, and ileostomy is much more manageable.
The structure really does dictate the physiological outcome.
Every single time.
That's a perfect place to leave it. This has been an incredible tour. Thank you for making such a complex chapter so clear.
It was a pleasure. It's a beautiful piece of anatomy to explore.
And thank you, our listener, for sharing this material with us for today's deep dive. We really hope this journey helps you visualize these vital structures and their impact.